In February, my brother and I decided to go to Australia on a working holiday visa for a year. We'd heard that people go there on these visas and are able to save up a good amount of money and then use that to go traveling or do other things. After doing our own research on this and seeing it was actually a very popular thing to do, we decided to try it ourselves. The goal was to get jobs and spend the whole next year working, then have enough money to hopefully be able to go and do a lot more traveling once it was all over. If only it was that easy. We spent the next few months planning and saving. We got our visas, and finally in June, we left. We started by spending a week and a half in Korea. We were there to pick up a friend who was coming with us to Australia and figured it was a great chance to explore Korea on our way. Once we got to Australia, we spent a day in Sydney. We went to the Opera House and explored the botanical gardens. It really was such an awesome day. I doubt I'll ever forget watching the sunset while sitting at the harbor. The next day, we packed up and flew to Brisbane in Queensland, Australia. This was to be our home base and where we would hopefully get jobs. We picked to live in Brisbane because of a few reasons. It's cheaper than places like Sydney and Melbourne. It's smaller, which we actually liked because we aren't even from a city at all. The unemployment rate is low. It's located near the Gold Coast and the Sunshine Coast, and a lot of people online said it's a really chill city, somewhere that's easy to live in. We decided to stay in Airbnbs because they're all already furnished, and if you stay in one for over a month, you can get really good discounts on them. You may be asking why not hostels if we're trying to save money, but to be honest, at this time we had never stayed in hostels and didn't really know how they worked. I've since stayed in them and I know they're fine, but also splitting between 3 people made the Airbnbs really not that bad on cost. We arrived and spent the first month just enjoying it. We explored the city, which I think we all totally fell in love with. The Riverwalk, South Bank, Central, Roma Street. It was all just so beautiful and fun to explore. We also used this time to get our tax ID numbers, set up bank accounts, get a PO box, and get our cell phones set up. Finally, the time came to stop messing around, and we all started trying to get jobs. For some reason, we really thought it would be easy. I think this is because so many people online who talk about this type of thing normally said it was no problem for them to get a job. We all started applying, starting by doing it online on places like Seek, Indeed, and Gumtree. We all had a few different resumes for different types of jobs. We were trying for everything. Office jobs, grocery stores, retail, farm work, and everything in between. But we would never hear anything back. We reworked our resumes and started trying to apply in person as well, which felt really good at the time. Lots of people were taking my resume at least and really acted interested, but in the end, I would never get a call back. Eventually, our friend ended up getting a job and it felt like we were really getting somewhere. I really tried to focus on retail jobs at this point as I had 7 years of retail experience, but it just wasn't happening. I started doing research online about what we were doing wrong and found lots of people saying that because our visa restricts us to only work for 6 months at a time, that no one was going to be interested in hiring us. There were other reasons as well, but it looked like we really were just at the bottom of the list no matter how you looked at it. At this point, it had been over 2 months and I was running out of money. I knew I could make it probably at least another month, but if I didn't find a job, I would have to go home without really seeing much of Australia at all. So I made a pretty hard choice. I chose to use my remaining money to go and solo travel the Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast, Sydney, and Hawaii. I reclined myself to the fact that once this was over, I would have to go home, totally broke, and start again. I chose to do this because up to this point, I'd seen nothing that made me believe I'd be able to get a job within the next month. I didn't want to end up going home and saying I really didn't see anything on this trip and never found a job. I came there to raise money and be able to go on an adventure, and I wasn't going to go back home without having some type of adventure, even if it was different than the original plan. As expected, this decision was met with resistance from my brother. He felt I was giving up on what we had set out to do, and in a way, I was. But my goal was always to travel. It was always to go on an adventure, and that's what I was doing. I really did understand his point of view, but it didn't change my mind. Also, to be fair, it wasn't easy to leave. We had all 3 started this adventure in Australia together, and to leave at this point alone just kind of sucked. We had all envisioned going through this crazy year together and coming out at the end of it together. Leaving was not an easy decision for me. That being said, this all really changed me. Up to this point, I'd wanted to try solo travel, but was always too nervous about how it would be alone. I was always afraid to stay in hostels. I'm not sure why, but I just didn't know what to expect out of it, and I'd built them up to be so much worse in my head. Because of everything that had happened up to this point, I just didn't care anymore. I wanted to see more before I had to leave, and the only way to do that was to do it alone and stay in hostels to be able to pay for it. Right now, I'm sitting in my home in Indiana, and I'm happy to say I have no regrets about leaving. The solo trip really ended up being one of the best things I've ever done in my life. I'm currently saving and planning to go back to the Philippines, Japan, and end in Australia to finish off my visa with the 2 people I left there. I learned more from this than I can list, but if there's anything I want you to take away from this, it's to not always expect things to go a certain way. Expect that things aren't always going to work out, but it's okay. It's okay to have to make a tough decision because you'll always grow from that experience. Also, if you're planning to do a working holiday visa in Australia, please don't let this story stop you from trying. But just know, no matter what anyone says, there is a chance that it's gonna be harder than you think and may not work out for you. Just know that going in and hope for the best. Who knows, you may find a job in the first week. And even if it doesn't work out, just seeing Australia is still pretty awesome. Let me know in the comments if you have any stories where you can relate to things turning out totally different than you expected, but still being okay in the end, and maybe you growing from it. Thanks for watching. I left 2 playlists for you. One's to all my other story times, and one's to my Australia videos so you can see how this all played out in more detail. I'll see you over on one of those in just a second.